Welcome back to Focal Point, to an episode of what I'm calling Better or Worse. Today we're talking about the Halloween movies, specifically 1 and 2. First one directed by John Carpenter, second one by Rick Rosenthal. Now we're not going to be talking about the other Halloween movies, at least today. Maybe I might come up with some more videos in the future, maybe next Halloween. See what happens. Either way, I wanted to talk about kind of what they did right, what they did wrong, what got better, what got worse. So please, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, for all this is my opinion. Let's get right into it.
For those of you who don't know the story of John Carpenter's Halloween, it goes as follows. The movie starts on Halloween night, 1963, with the young Michael Myers in a clown costume, stalking, then killing his sister Judith Myers with a kitchen knife.
Michael?
15 years later, on the night of October 30th, he escapes from Illinois State Hospital and hijacks a car that his psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence, was in, while he was on his way to the hospital to transport Michael Myers to a judge, most likely to be locked away forever. It is clear later on that Loomis knows exactly where he is headed. The morning of Halloween in Haddonfield, Illinois, Lori, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, is on her way to her high school. She drops off a key to the Myers residence as requested from her father, while she's followed by a young boy, Tommy, as they talk about what they will do when Lori will be babysitting him that night. That action of Lori dropping off the key to the Myers residence apparently sets him off, for he's watching it the whole time. He then proceeds to stalk Lori and her two friends, Annie and Linda. Lori seems to be the only one who is worried about this strange shape of a man who's been following them.
The only reason she babysits is to have a relationship. I think it's cute. Hey, jerk! Speak!
Dr. Loomis is trying to warn the proper authorities of what could happen. Eventually, convinces the sheriff, which is Annie's father, to help him. And eventually, they camp out in front of the Myers residence after finding out that he isn't there. Eventually, Annie picks up Lori from her house. Since Annie's babysitting Lindsay, that lives across the street from Tommy, that Lori's supposed to be babysitting that night. Lindsay is then taken to Tommy's house so that Annie can go see her boyfriend. Michael Myers then kills Annie while she's in her car, about to drive off. Then Linda and her boyfriend Bob end up making it to Lindsay's house because they assume no one is there, only for them both to be killed. Linda, of which, is killed while on a call with Lori. Lori, being suspicious, eventually goes to check out Lindsay's house to see if her friends are fine, only for her to find out that all of her friends are dead, and she comes face to face with Michael Myers. Lori somehow makes it back to Tommy's safe.
Get upstairs. All right, upstairs. Get Lindsay. Lock the bedroom door. Do as I say. Hurry!
Yet somehow Michael Myers appears in the house. Lori eventually ends up stabbing Michael with his own knife and presumes he is dead. She then tells the
Listen to
kids to
me.
go to a neighbor's house to call the
I want you to go
cops.
down the stairs and out the front door. I want you to go down the street to the Mackenzie's house. I want you to tell them to call the police and tell them to send them over here. Now, do you understand me? Go do as I say.
Dr. Loomis, who has since discovered the car that Michael stole the day before by the Myers residence, goes looking for him in the neighborhood. He ended up running into the kids who was running away from Tommy's house, and instinctually goes to find Lori and Michael struggling with each other upstairs. Loomis then fires 6 shots into Michael. Michael eventually falling out the second-story balcony. Only when Loomis goes to check, Michael's disappeared. So let's just talk about the music. Of course, you must remember the classic Halloween theme that sent chills down your spine when you first heard it. The music has such a feeling of doom and terror to let you know that something awful is always just around the corner. I feel like it's always cued at the perfect times, and it doesn't really play out during the duration of this film. Also, the score was almost entirely made by John Carpenter, excluding Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, which I still think is a pretty good choice. It kind of really goes with the theme of the movie. It's been said that when John Carpenter screened the movie for an executive of the movie industry, she wasn't too impressed. She said the movie didn't frighten her and that it wasn't going to do well. That was until she saw the movie with the full score. The main theme of the movie has since appeared in every other Halloween in some form or another, except for Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which doesn't really have anything to do with any of the other Halloween movies. I'm really confident in saying that the music is like the glue that holds this movie together. Now, for the costume choice for Michael Myers. I know anyone who gets a glimpse of this mask knows exactly who this character is and where he is from, for a reason. The mask is one of the most iconic images in cinema history. The blank white expressionless face, with the eye sockets cut out, and that disheveled matted hair. It's really hard to tell if the effect of this movie would have been the same if they picked any other masks they had to choose from. I guess we'll never know what could have been. But one thing's for sure, the image definitely works. Not to mention the creepy boiler room coveralls. Most definitely a creepy cherry on top. I wanted to add on that when I was a kid, well, when my sister and I were both kids, she's gonna hate me for saying this, we were so terrified of Michael Myers' image that we ended up tossing away this VHS cover that had his face on it. I think it was like Halloween 4, Halloween 6, something like that. Well, you know, we were just so terrified. And I really gotta say, we weren't as scared as we were with like Jason. You know, it didn't really scare us. Freddy Krueger didn't really scare us. You know, it's just that face, that white pale face is so haunting. And I really think it's probably the scariest, at least for a kid. I mean, God, it's fucking creepy. Now for the kill count, Michael had 5 kills this movie, at least as far as we know. We only do see 4 on screen, but we get that glimpse of the hardware store worker in the bushes that no one really finds in this movie. And keep that in mind for any future discussions of any other Halloween movies. We'll be talking about Halloween 2 pretty soon, but just keep that in mind. Now, when it gets to the acting, we're going to see a little bit of the cons we're going to get into in just a moment. I think we can all agree that it's not the most Academy Award winning at times, especially the scene here with Loomis at the hospital.
Are you alright? You're alright?
Yes, I'm okay.
He's gone. He's gone from here. The evil is gone.
And now I think that aside, Donald Pleasence did a really good job for the rest of the movie. And is definitely the most seasoned out of all the actors. I also think that Jamie Lee Curtis did a really good job as well. And I think as a whole, everybody did pretty well with what was handed for them. And which brings me to the cons of the movie. So with the cons, starting off, let's talk about the budget. Originally, the movie had a budget of about $300,000, but was bumped up to $325,000 after signing on Donald Pleasence. Nowadays, that would have been maybe estimated to be about $11 million to shoot the same movie today. Even for its time, it was an extremely low-budgeted film that only had 21 days to shoot, which led to some not-so-pleasant takes that we have in the film. The budget also took a toll on the audio. Some of the voices and conversations are shoddy sometimes, and especially around the climax of the film when Jamie Lee Curtis is crying and screaming, it can be pretty jarring and kind of annoying. So adding to the budget, there was a bit of cinematography issues added. You can tell this movie wasn't shot in Illinois in the fall. They had to shoot this movie in LA during the spring. All the shrubbery and tree leaves you can see that are green, and you can even see a palm tree in one of the shots. And all the brown leaves that you see on the ground were actually painted and placed there where they needed to shoot. Everyone on set had to constantly pick up and collect the leaves after every shot so they wouldn't blow away, because they only had a limited amount. They could only afford so many, you know? Now, all those things aside, I can really say this movie still holds up today. I also want to mention that John Carpenter had some inspiration from 1960s Psycho, which also innovated the horror genre as well for its time. Not to mention that Jamie Lee Curtis is the daughter of Janet Leigh, the woman in the famous shower scene of Psycho, which, true Scream Queen lineage, if you ask me. So all of that being said, I can really say Halloween is maybe not an almost perfect horror movie, but really good. Definitely a landmark when it comes to the slasher and horror genre. And with all that said, let's move on to Halloween 2. directed by Rick Rosenthal, with John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who both wrote the first Halloween film, taking on the role of producers. So this movie starts off right where the last one left off, to kind of get you up to speed of what happened with the previous one, with a little extra. By the way, all the adult main actors reprise their roles to the surviving characters. Although now Dr. Loomis checks to where Michael Myers should have landed, and only finds an impression of his body on the grass, then asks a neighbor to call the cops.
Call the police. Tell the sheriff I shot him.
Who?
Tell him he's still on the loose.
Is this some kind of joke? I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
Now Michael Myers is evading Loomis and the sheriff by sneaking around behind people's houses. He ends up sneaking into a house, picking up a knife, goes into another house, and ends up killing this woman, which seems to be for no apparent reason at all, to be honest.
Yeah, her name's Laurie Strode. Possibly penetrating.
While Laurie's being carted off to the hospital to be treated for her injuries, Loomis and the sheriff think they spot Michael Myers on the street. Loomis freaks out and scares the guy into the street, where he's then hit by a police cruiser and is pinned against a van. The kid, who is later to be found to be Ben Tramer, Laurie's crush from the first movie. Anyway, the sheriff is told that his daughter Annie's body has been found. So Loomis and the sheriff and the other police officer head on that way. We're cut back to Laurie in the hospital, but we're now forced to watch this cringy love interest aspect of this movie with Laurie and this EMT Jimmy, which just feels so forced and really kind of has no purpose except to inform Laurie that who her attacker was. Michael Myers then ends up sneaking into some car from a nurse on her way to the hospital, which is kind of strange because you don't really see how that ever happened. I mean, you clearly see the girls drive off and he's not even in the car. So yeah. Now Michael Myers is sneaking around the hospital, and unbeknownst to even the security guard, who of course isn't paying attention, and in a familiar event to the first one, he ends up cutting the phone lines, and it's much how you would expect it to go. Now let's cut back to Loomis, and right now he's getting aid from the deputy, and they head to this elementary school because they believe that he broke in. And while there, he's told that he must leave Haddonfield on orders of the government, and will be escorted by a state marshal out of town. Now, adding to more backstory for Michael Myers, besides the elementary school part, we're cut back to Laurie in the hospital, and she's starting to have these dreams that essentially is telling us that Michael Myers is her brother. Laurie, now figuring out Michael Myers' intent, essentially, tries to escape. Michael, eventually killing the last nurse alive, is now face to face with Laurie again. And Laurie manages to hobble away and ends up in one of these sabotaged cars out in front of the hospital. Jimmy eventually ends up in the same car just to pass out and be a useless character because we don't see him for the rest of the movie. Eventually, Loomis and company end up in the hospital after Loomis is told that Laurie is Michael Myers' sister, and he demands that they go at gunpoint. So now we've reached the climax of the film, where Laurie joins Loomis and company, and Loomis ends up shooting Michael 5 times and falls to the floor.
Get away from him! But he stopped breathing!
The state marshal is then killed, and Loomis and Laurie try to hide. They end up in a room filled with a bunch of tanks filled with different gases, and eventually Michael ends up finding that room. He breaks in and then stabs Loomis in the stomach, only for Laurie to shoot him in the face twice. Michael, apparently blinded now, is swinging wildly into the air, being led around by the sounds of Laurie and Loomis releasing the gases out of these tanks. Finally, Laurie runs out of the room and Loomis lights up the room, essentially sacrificing himself. Yet Michael Myers walks out of the flames, only to fall on the ground and burn to death. At least for this movie. So to be completely honest, I think that that's where the series should have ended. Obviously, most of us know that that didn't happen. Now, to be completely fair to this movie as a whole, I kind of like it. I think the music is still good. They added a few new songs, and I believe they placed them in just the right spots. The half of the movie, you're put into these quiet, eerie moments, only for the music to hit you with these horrifyingly tense moments. Pairing that with the great camera work and sound production, I feel like it elevated number 2 higher than the first movie in terms of production, with the movie having a much higher budget this time around. I also think the acting most definitely improved as well. I really enjoy Loomis being this obsessed nutjob doctor following Michael around. Now that being said, I'm not quite sure how to feel about all the killing. Like I said earlier in the beginning of the film, he kills this woman that seems to be for no reason. To be honest, what was stopping Michael from going straight into Laurie's room and just murdering her, now that we know his intention? I mean, it's been shown that he's almost unstoppable. Instead, we get this killing spree where he has to kill everyone. The body count for this movie is 9 that we can see by Michael's hands, which is a step up from the last movie, but we really don't know the full extent. I mean, this is like a huge hospital, and are we to believe that he only killed this handful of people? Like, where's the rest of the patients and the staff? Instead of showing us anything with some real meaning, we're greeted with this half-baked story of Michael just wanting to kill his family. This like dull dream sequence and this forced romantic plot that does nothing to enrich the story. In all fairness, I have to say this sequel is not better than the first in terms of story and character building. This movie likes to fall into the classic horror tropes that the first one did really well on. And in the first movie, the murders were more interesting and unique. Like Michael stabbing Bob in the kitchen and leaving him hanging there. Like, that's crazy. And it was for a purpose, to eventually get to Laurie. But in this one, we get this weird early style jump scare, and this scene of the two in the hot tub is just for mere filler and for something for you to gawk at. Now, is this movie better or worse? I gotta say it's worse. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy it and it was a bad film. The original as a whole just did it better. That might be an ongoing thing you'll be hearing from me. The more I talk about reboots and sequels, I'm more likely gonna agree with the original or like the original better and maybe dog on the reboots for certain things. Now, some reboots and some sequels are far better than the original, but those are topics for a different video. And I kinda also really wanted to talk about Halloween 1 and 2 by Rob Zombie. Kind of what changed with those, kind of what they did better or worse. It's probably not gonna be better, but that'll be for another time. So now, thank you for watching. If you liked what I did here, please leave a like. If you want me to make a video talking about anything else, please leave a comment. Maybe subscribe if you haven't done so already. I would really like to make more videos like this, and they do take kind of long, which is why it's been like 3 weeks since I uploaded a video, but I'd really like to get more of these out there, especially if you guys like them. So thank you. Oh, and one more thing. Happy Halloween.